Be reading from the May 6, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: United Health Group plans to stop requiring doctors to get approvals for an array of procedures, tests, and services, potentially assuaging frustrations expressed by physicians and patients. Investor appetite for memory chip stocks helped push up the S&P 500 and NASDAQ by 0.8% and 1%, respectively, to records, while the Dow rose 0.7%. Hong Kong's economy expanded at its fastest pace in nearly 5 years in the first quarter of 2026, accelerating 2.9% from the end of 2025. The SEC proposed amendments that would give public companies the option to file reports semi-annually, rather than on a quarterly basis as required by federal securities laws. Higher sales of cancer treatments helped fuel better than expected first quarter sales and profit for Pfizer, which reaffirmed its forecast for all of 2026. Coinbase will lay off 700 employees, or 14% of its workforce, as part of an effort to trim costs and streamline the cryptocurrency exchange's operations. PayPal expects to cut 20% of its staff over the next 2 to 3 years, pursuing plans to shrink cost and accelerate its adoption of artificial intelligence. AB InBev booked its first sales volumes growth in 3 years, adding to signs of a rebound in the beer industry. James Murdoch is in advanced talks to buy Vox Media's New York Magazine and podcast division. KKR swung to a first quarter profit, with revenue from its insurance division more than doubling and profits from fees and deals moving higher. Now for the key articles under the worldwide section. Trump chose to look the other way after Iran launched 3 salvos of missiles and drones into the UAE, and later said he was pausing an effort to move commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz. China escalated its fight against the U.S. over Iranian oil, defying American sanctions ahead of Trump's scheduled visit to Beijing next week. A majority of Trump-endorsed Indiana state Senate candidates prevailed in Republican primaries. A sign his grip on the party base remains firm. In Ohio, Trump stalwart Vivek Ramaswamy won the GOP primary for governor. Federal prosecutors brought an additional charge against the man accused of attempting to assassinate Trump at a press gala. Alphabet's Google, Microsoft, and XAI agreed with the Trump administration to share early versions of their AI programs to assess their capabilities and security before releasing them to the public. Trump upbraided FDA Commissioner Marty McCary for not moving quickly enough to approve flavored vapes and nicotine products. The WHO said it is possible there was a rare human-to-human transmission of hantavirus on a cruise ship. The New York Times was sued by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, over allegations it discriminated against a white man by passing him over for promotion in a case the paper said was politically motivated. Vladimir Sklarov, who claimed to have connections to the illustrious Astor family and lent money to billionaires, was charged with wire fraud and money laundering in Manhattan federal court. Russian drone and missile strikes targeting Ukraine's power grid killed at least 5 people and wounded 39 others, Ukrainian authorities said. Died Bob Skinner, 94, MLB player and coach. The picture on today's front page shows 4 people dressed up as mascots with huge heads, and they stand probably 3 feet taller than President Trump, who is reviewing them. And that caption reads, President's Day. After ordering the revival Tuesday of the Presidential Physical Fitness Award for school children, President Trump greets the racing presidents, George, Tom, Teddy, and Abe, and Screech the Eagle, mascots of baseball's Washington Nationals. And that caption reads, Heads of State meet at the White House. Now for articles from the front page. Gulf states fear U.S. hesitance to retaliate emboldens Iran. Tehran appears to be testing the limits of Trump's restraint with hostile moves. By Yaroslav Trofimov. Dubai. President Trump chose to look the other way after Iran launched 3 salvos of missiles and drones into the United Arab Emirates, one of the U.S.'s main Middle Eastern partners, despite a ceasefire he negotiated nearly a month ago. The likely conclusion in Tehran, Persian Gulf government's fear is that further escalation pays off because Trump is so intent on extricating himself from the war that he will ignore renewed Iranian attacks on the U.S. regional allies. European and Asian nations, allies, and strategic adversaries alike are watching this closely too. On Tuesday, Trump said he is pausing an effort he had announced 2 days earlier to move commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz, and that great progress had been made toward a complete and final agreement with representatives of Iran. Ever since the war began on February 28th, Iranian leaders have frequently repeated a phrase attributed to Hosni Mubarak, Egypt's deposed president, that those who wrap themselves in America are naked. The feeling in the UAE and fellow Gulf monarchies after Tehran restarted the missile and drone strikes on Monday is that Mubarak might have had a point, diplomats and analysts said. Iran struck the UAE only functioning oil export port, Fujairah, causing a fire and injuring 3 people, and fired ballistic cruise missiles at other Emirati targets. In total, the attacks involved 15 missiles and 4 drones. Trump, a Republican, characterized the attack as minor, though it disrupted flights and forced the UAE government to close schools for the rest of the week. On Tuesday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that, as far as Washington is concerned, the ceasefire certainly holds. A few hours later, Iran launched another attack, according to the United Arab Emirates Ministry of Defense. Iran seems ready for the ceasefire to be broken down, and the U.S. is not. So it is a unilateral ceasefire at this point, said Mahdi Ghulam, a fellow at the ORF Middle East think tank in Dubai. U.S. oil futures dropped 3.9% to $102.27 a barrel on Tuesday, and Brent dropped 3.99% to $109.87. The front month contracts for both have climbed significantly amid the Iran war and are up 78.1% and 80.6% respectively in 2026. The United Arab Emirates, attacked by 2,838 missiles and drones since February, and other Gulf states are in the line of fire because of the U.S. and Israeli decision to strike Iran, said Dania Thafer, director of the Gulf International Forum, a Washington, D.C. based think tank. From the perspective of the Gulf states, it looks like the U.S. is not prioritizing their security and basically threw the Gulf states under the bus, Thafer said. If the U.S. doesn't respond, then the Iranians will conclude that the U.S. doesn't want to go back to war, and this affects deterrence. Iran's attacks show they are testing the limits. The question is how far they will push before triggering a U.S. response. That is a risky game with a president who has clear expectations and enforces them, said Jason Greenblatt, who served as White House envoy to the Middle East in the first Trump administration. AI's stark choice: cut jobs or stretch workforce. Split emerges among bosses over best use of staff as technology increases efficiency. By Chip Cutter and Lindsay Ellis. Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong says his company is cutting 14% of its workforce as AI changes how we work. PayPal plans to cut 20% of its staff over the next 2 to 3 years, part of plans to step up its AI adoption. Then there is Axon Enterprise President Josh Eisner, who recently emailed the Taser makers more than 5,000 staffers and told them to essentially breathe. Artificial intelligence won't trigger layoffs anytime soon, he assured them. I am thinking of AI as the thing that allows our teams to do more, not the thing that replaces our teams, Eisner wrote. Even if the technology lets staff be twice or even 3 times as productive, there will be additional problems to solve. So, he added, block out the noise and keep kicking ass. The message arrived at a moment of extreme anxiety in corporate America over how many jobs could be lost to AI's powers to speed up and supplant much of the white-collar work. Among executives making such decisions, a split is emerging. Use AI to shrink the workforce or stretch it. Those diverging philosophies have been on display on earnings calls and in other recent announcements. Armstrong said Tuesday that Coinbase would eliminate hundreds of jobs as AI becomes more embedded in the cryptocurrency exchange's operations. Staff will manage agents to do more of the work, he said. Bed Bath & Beyond CEO told investors last week that with AI, we're going to experience significant reduction in headcount. Meta's chief financial officer, Susan Lee, questioned how many employees the social media company would eventually need as AI is able to do more. At the other end of the spectrum are companies that say they can keep headcounts flat, not necessarily hiring, but not firing either, by achieving more with existing teams. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Spirit Air collapse paves way for fares to go up, by Dean Seal. Spirit Airlines' demise makes it even easier for airlines to charge higher fares. The company's collapse last weekend removes a decades-old carrier that helped set the floor for cheap flights and pressured bigger competitors to keep pace. Even though Spirit shrank as it struggled in recent years, the airline was selling rock-bottom tickets right up until the end, such as a $25 one-way ticket from Atlanta to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Airlines have since pledged to help stranded Spirit customers by temporarily capping fares. Some have rolled out discounts on routes that Spirit operated through early May. That relief for travelers isn't permanent, though, and industry observers expect prices to rise. Secret team rethinks Ford's assembly line. Automaker is tearing up manufacturing processes to build $30,000 electric truck. By Sharon Turlip, Ellen Park, Michigan. A crew of engineers slipped past the empty security gate at a Ford motor truck plant outside Detroit just after 3 a.m. The factory lines were still at that hour, but that was the point. The crew was there to test a section of a new pickup that few at the company knew even existed. Ford's secret project had an ambitious goal: to figure out how to make electric vehicles in the U.S. that could compete with the Chinese models clobbering competitors globally. The secret is now out as Ford races toward building its first model, a new truck it says will be nearly as fast as a Mustang, travel around 300 miles on a single charge, and feature in-car technology to compete with Tesla and China. It's aiming for a 2027 launch and a price tag of around $30,000, the cost of a Toyota Camry. Getting there means tearing up a century of manufacturing practices in a notoriously hidebound industry. At stake for Ford is securing a future beyond the gas-guzzling pickups and SUVs that have long defined its bottom line. The project has been kept quiet from its 2022 start, led by veterans from Tesla and Apple, who worked on designs out of a California office. Ford eventually brought in some of its own employees to help execute the vision. The process was filled with misunderstandings and distrust, as the techie outsiders worked to win over the risk-adverse industry veterans. To build these new EVs, the company must use fewer people and simpler parts and dismantle decades of engineering inertia. Chief Executive Jim Farley is calling it Ford's new Model T moment. Rival automakers say overcoming China on EVs can't be done, given their advantages: extensive government backing, low-cost labor, and a massive head start. Whether Ford's big bet will work may come down to how well Detroit and Silicon Valley can work together. Traditional automakers have sometimes tried to infuse outside know-how into their operations, with often bleak results, from abandoned robo-taxi projects to costly, unpopular EVs. With its new truck, Ford says it has eliminated thousands of feet of heavy copper wiring, cut out hundreds of parts, and made it 15% more aerodynamic than its other pickups. Analysts and consultants question whether Ford can pull off what it's promised, and if it does, whether people will buy the truck. Now for other articles within the paper. Ship virus may have passed between humans, by Jennifer Kalfas. The World Health Organization said it is possible there was human-to-human transmission of hantavirus on a cruise ship in the Atlantic Ocean, a rare way the virus typically carried by rodents can spread. We do believe that there may be some human-to-human transmission that's happening among the really close contacts. Maria van Kerkhove, the WHO's Director for Epidemic and Pandemic Preparedness and Prevention, said Tuesday morning. We don't have a full picture yet, she said, but we have some working assumptions. A suspected hantavirus outbreak aboard a ship carrying 147 passengers and crew has led to 3 deaths and 4 other infections, the World Health Organization said. 2 of the 7 total cases have been confirmed in laboratories as hantavirus, and the 5 others were suspected cases, the WHO said. The passenger cruise ship called MV Hondius was traveling in the Atlantic Ocean, said the vessel's operator, Ocean-Wide Expectations, and is currently off the coast of Western African nation of Cape Verde. Officials are preparing to evacuate 2 sick people on board to the Netherlands, Van Kerkhove said. After they are evacuated, the ship will go to the Canary Islands, where Spanish authorities will work with the WHO to do a full epidemiological investigation, Van Kerkhove said. Ocean Expeditions said Tuesday that discussions related to the ship's next steps for disembarkment are continuing. United Health eases care hurdles. Insured to reduce prior authorizations by 1/3, widening access to some tests. The company is using technology backed by AI in making change. By Anna Wild Matthews. United Health Group plans to stop requiring doctors to get approvals for an array of procedures, tests, and services, cutting back on a process that has long been detested by physicians and patients. United Health, parent of the biggest U.S. health insurer, said the changes will slash the number of reviews by nearly 1/3, starting later this year. Doctors have long complained about the paperwork they must complete to get insurers' permission for care, which can lead to delays and denials. United Healthcare will stop requiring sign-offs for tests including echocardiograms, some chiropractic care, and certain outpatient surgeries. Also on the list is some outpatient therapy. The insurer said it is using technology backed by artificial intelligence to help reduce the need for pre-authorization reviews. The rollback is part of an effort by health insurers to counter a backlash against pre-authorizations. Rivals like CVS Health's Aetna and Cigna Group also have made moves to ease these types of reviews. Beijing defies U.S. sanctions blocking Iranian oil, by Hannah Mayo. China escalated its fight against the U.S. over Iranian oil, defying American sanctions in a show of resistance ahead of President Trump's visit to Beijing planned for next week. Beijing has been wary of being seen to openly violate U.S. sanctions, even as privately run Chinese refineries buy nearly every barrel of oil Iran exports. But China's Commerce Ministry on Saturday told companies not to comply with the U.S.'s blacklisting of several Chinese refineries over alleged purchases of Iranian oil, invoking for the first time a 2021 blocking rule designed to counteract foreign laws it believes violate international norms or restrict trade. It sends a broader message that China is willing and can resist what it views as unilateral and unfair sanctions that hurt Chinese interest, said Dylan Low, a professor at Singapore's Nanyang Technological University who studies China's foreign policy. At least 5 die in Russian attacks. Russian drone and missile strikes targeting Ukraine's power grid overnight into Tuesday killed at least 5 people and wounded 39 others, Ukrainian authorities said Tuesday, less than a day before Kyiv said it would enact a ceasefire and 3 days before Moscow promised its own pause in hostilities. President Volodymyr Zelensky rebuked Moscow for what he said was its utter cynicism in launching the attacks after Russia announced a unilateral ceasefire to mark the 81st anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany. The proposal to stop fighting follows a pattern of Russia declaring short unilateral ceasefires timed to holidays. President escalates his feud with Pope, by Robbie Gramer and Marcus Walker. Rome. President Trump escalated his public feud with Pope Leo XIV, accusing the pontiff of endangering Catholics by opposing U.S. military action against Iran. The president's latest broadside against the Pope could complicate Secretary of State Marco Rubio's visit to Rome this week, where he is set to meet with Pope Leo in a bid to reset U.S.-Vatican relations after months of tensions. The Chicago-born pontiff has become one of the most outspoken critics of Trump's growing use of military force, angering a president whose strong electoral support from Christians helped vault him back into the White House. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the opinion pages, where is Trump going in the Gulf? The president is better at buying time than he is at figuring out how to use it. By Holman W. Jenkins, Jr. President Eisenhower was known to say that plans are worthless, but planning is everything. Donald Trump didn't have a plan B or C, D, E, or F when plan A, a fairly instantaneous collapse of the Iranian regime, failed to materialize. He may well expect now to lose his domestic base over spiking gasoline prices due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. But by all signs, Mr. Trump consciously accepted this risk when he launched a war without seeking public or opposition buy-in, which he knew he wouldn't get. One mistake he has so far avoided and hopefully will continue to avoid is letting the very predictable action by Iran become Iran's leverage over him to abandon the aims he started with. But if he's willing to power through the economic risk, there is another risk he won't power through. Don't expect him to deploy large numbers of ground troops if that's what it would take to secure the goals he keeps citing, which are pretty much tantamount to regime change, whether or not he now calls it that. Which is fine. The U.S. is blessed in one way. It can always swallow defeat and loss of face for its president by getting rid of its president and casting his party into the wilderness. Mr. Trump, I think, is ready for this. And even an abject failure would only mean the U.S. and its allies must return to deterring Iran by other means. But we're not there yet. The Trump administration still has a card or two to play. Sunday and Monday saw the introduction of Project Freedom. U.S. Central Command announced a very large force, guided missile destroyers, over 100 land and sea-based aircraft, multi-domain unmanned platforms, and 15,000 service members to support a very minuscule aim, helping to guide any ships stuck in the Gulf for the past 2 months that were willing to risk an exit. Naturally, the world wonders what Mr. Trump has up his sleeve, especially after Iran responded to this minimalist effort by firing on U.S. warships and third-party vessels. To the disappointment of many, it's probably not a prelude to the pitched battle they've been seeking. The U.S. Navy against the drone and missile threat Iran has held over the strait. The problem? Even if the U.S. prevails handily in such a fight without losing a ship or a plane, an unreformed regime can resurrect the threat the moment we sail away. The last card for the administration, as I've pointed out ad nauseum, is the destruction of the Iranian oil industry from the air. Oil money is the ultimate prize of Iranian politics, and let's credit its regime survivalist with some rationality. If Mr. Trump credibly threatened lasting damage to this money flow, its members would likely quickly unite around concessions he could present as a win. Yes, many in the regime might prefer to continue the war in search of their own win. Stopping now means facing, on unfavorable terms, their own existential threat, their own people having invited and lost a destructive war. But the regime would still have billions of dollars a month in oil revenues to buy its way with. Here, we need to turn our thinking around a bit. Even critics like the Brookings Institution's Robin Brooks credit Mr. Trump with successfully manipulating stock and oil markets to create running room for himself, and he has skillfully. But had Mr. Trump declared his independence from the markets and indifference to the economic fallout from the get-go, he would have more leverage over Iran, not less. Indeed, puzzlingly, one of the stops he failed to pull out on day one was blocking Iran's oil exports, depriving the regime of millions of dollars a day to defend itself. Mr. Trump keeps signaling that Iran will be an easy win. He's got them right where he wants them. In doing so, he makes it too easy on other countries' leaders. However aggravated U.S. allies and other nations might be with Mr. Trump, their pressure should be on Iran, not the U.S., to get energy moving again. All this cost Mr. Trump leverage. He may well conclude he made a mistake after his initial miscalculation by not communicating a greater determination not to be dissuaded from his war aims by economic blowback. The world would have taken notice of his seriousness. Remind yourself, these aims are often short-handed as curbing Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile ambitions. The longhand version, so Iran can't dominate the Persian Gulf and hold the world hostage to regime survival, as it's now doing. Ironically, had Mr. Trump sent the right signals, the net result might not be very different from today's: an indefinite interruption in oil from the Persian Gulf. But with one considerable exception. Both Iran and the world would have to bet with more certainty on the U.S. sticking to its aims and forcing Iran to abandon its hostile stance toward its region and the global community. A tax break for foreigners and trial lawyers. This may be the most perverse incentive of the U.S. tort system. By Michael Toth. America's one-of-a-kind tort system generates many perverse incentives, but this one takes the cake. Foreign investors receive special tax treatment for financing lawsuits against American companies. Congress should close the loophole that lets Russian oligarchs bankroll legal battles in the U.S. without paying a dime in federal taxes. America's already sky-high liability costs grew at an average of 7.1% annually between 2016 and 2022, draining capital from productive investment. Litigation finance is a major driver. Funders shunt capital from around the world into U.S. lawsuits, taking a cut of any recovery. One recent estimate puts the lost productivity cost of third-party financed litigation at $54.2 billion annually. Worse, foreign funders in litigation finance are rewarded with a tax advantage. Take three identical cases. One, A plaintiff pays a law firm $100,000 and recovers $1 million. 2. The law firm fronts the cost on contingency and achieves the same result. 3. A funder contributes $100,000 for the same outcome. In each scenario, someone invests in a legal claim that generates a positive return, but the tax consequences are very different. The plaintiff and the law firm are hit with a higher tax bill as a result of tax code provisions subjecting recoveries to ordinary income tax rates, which top out at 37%. Funders, by contrast, dress up their investments as prepaid forwards and claim capital gains treatment, lowering their top federal tax rate to 23.8%, while exempting foreign funders from U.S. taxes entirely. The last part isn't an error. Foreign investors pay to sue American companies in U.S. courts and owe nothing in U.S. taxes. The sweetheart tax treatment hasn't gone unnoticed. Russian billionaires with ties to Vladimir Putin have poured millions of dollars into U.S. litigation to avoid international sanctions, according to a 2024 report in Bloomberg Law. Federal lawmakers have repeatedly revised the tax code's definition of capital assets to exclude compensation that isn't genuine capital investment. Last year, a bill sponsored by Senate and House Republicans to exclude litigation finance from capital gains treatment would have generated $3.5 billion in federal revenue over 10 years, according to the Joint Committee on Taxation. GOP lawmakers should revisit this proposal to offset more pro-growth tax relief. Critics claim that closing the litigation finance loophole amounts to picking winners and losers. The tax code already does that. Capital gets preferential treatment over income because it fuels economic growth. There's nothing growth-enhancing about foreign-funded litigation designed to extract value from U.S. companies while clogging American courts. If congressional Republicans can't draw a distinction between investment in wealth-creating American companies and funding litigation against these same businesses, they will give fodder to their Democratic colleagues who propose to fix the preferential treatment for investment by getting rid of the tax code's preference for capital gains altogether. Congress doesn't need to go that far. It needs to stop subsidizing lawsuits against the American economy. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The lawsuits will continue until morale improves. A California court holds a pharmaceutical company can be found liable for not innovating quickly enough. By Corey L. Andrews. The California Supreme Court takes up a strange question Wednesday. Can a pharmaceutical company be sued for negligence, not because its Food and Drug Administration approved drug was defective or its warnings insufficient, but because the company didn't bring a better version to market sooner? The California Court of Appeal answered yes in a 2024 decision. It invented a tort out of failing to innovate fast enough. If the state high court lets this ruling stand, it won't merely distort product liability law, it will punish medical progress. Gilead developed tenofovir disoproxil fumarate, or TDF. The FDA approved it in 2001 as Vereed and in 2004 as Truvada. These breakthrough medications converted HIV from a death sentence into a manageable chronic illness, saving millions of lives. While working on TDF, Gilead exported an alternative therapy, tenofovir alafenamide, or TAF. Early tests looked promising, but the company paused development in 2004. The choice was rational. Long-term safety data was unavailable, efficacy thresholds hadn't been cleared, and further investment in an unproven compound risked starving proven therapies of resources. Gilead returned to TAF in 2010, engaging in years of painstaking research and costly clinical trials. Gilead launched TAF-based medicines in 2015 with comparable antiviral power and meaningful improved kidney and bone safety for some patients. Plaintiffs here don't claim those drugs or the TDF ones were defective. They don't allege inadequate warnings about known risks. Their theory is that Gilead should have commercialized TAF earlier. They allege that the company dragged its feet to squeeze extra profits from TDF patents. The Court of Appeal embraced that claim. It held that a manufacturer can breach a duty of reasonable care merely by pausing or delaying a safer alternative, even when the existing product met every regulatory and tort law standard of its era. Traditional product liability demands a defect in the product or its labeling. This ruling discards both requirements. It converts ordinary scientific and business judgments into actionable negligence. This is a radical break from the law. Product liability has always turned on product risks a manufacturer introduces to market, not on hypothetical improvements it might have rushed to consumers. Imposing a duty to accelerate every promising alternative would force companies to revisit every strategic pause, every resource allocation, and every clinical decision through the distorting lens of hindsight. Otherwise, juries lacking scientific or regulatory training could be asked to pronounce whether billion-dollar research and development choices were reasonable years after the fact. The consequences of this new tort are predictable and perverse. Developing a new drug already costs more than $1 billion and takes more than a decade. Follow-on innovations like TAF are the lifeblood of medical progress. Yet, they are among the first casualties when litigation risk spikes. Companies will respond by either rushing half-baked products to market, steering clear of high-risk diseases, or abandoning incremental advances that might later trigger should have done it sooner tort suits. Prices will rise as the few drugs that still reach patients will carry a new tax of unpredictable liability. There is a proper place to regulate drug risks. the federal scheme Congress and the FDA designed. Regulators approve drugs on evidence available at the time. They demand rigorous proof of safety and efficacy. They don't require clairvoyance. The California Court of Appeals approach lets state juries override those contemporaneous judgments, declaring, after the fact, that a company should have moved faster with data that, at the time, didn't justify the leap. Judges and jurors are ill-suited to referee such intricate scientific and commercial calls. The proper arena for weighing innovation incentives against safety is the federal regulatory process, not after-the-fact state tort suits. California, a historic leader in technology and life sciences, risks becoming the jurisdiction where tomorrow's cures are litigated into non-existence. Activists may cast a reversal of the appeals court decision as a win for drug companies at patients' expense, but that is a false dichotomy. Patients today enjoy longer, healthier lives thanks to the iterative process this lawsuit would penalize. The earliest HIV therapies were crude and toxic. Each refinement arrived because companies had room to experiment, to fail, and try again, without fearing that every prudent pause would invite a payday for lawyers, penalizing the scientific caution that careful safety requires doesn't speed or improve cures. The California Supreme Court has a clear path forward. It can reaffirm that product liability requires a defective product or inadequate warning, not judicial oversight of R&D timelines. It can safeguard the incentives that have made American pharmaceutical innovation the envy of the world, and it can do so while preserving every traditional tool for holding companies accountable when they truly cut corners on safety or conceal known risks. The stakes reach far beyond this case. If California blesses liability for the pace of innovation, other states will feel the pull. The result won't be safer or faster drugs. It will be fewer of both. Medical miracles depend on risk-taking, not on risk-free litigation. California's patients and the nation's deserve no less. Mr. Andrews is General Counsel and Vice President of Litigation at the Washington Legal Foundation. Good riddance to racial gerrymandering. If there was any doubt, Barack Obama proved that white voters are willing to support black candidates. By Jason L. Riley. The fainting spells on the left after last week's Supreme Court ruling in Louisiana versus Calais were probably to be expected. Democrats these days reject colorblind public policies that they championed in a previous era and scoff at clear evidence of America's racial progress. A court decision that reins in racially gerrymandered voting districts checked both boxes, so it is no wonder that Democratic elites from Barack Obama on down are outraged. Quote, today's Supreme Court decision effectively guts a key pillar of the Voting Rights Act, freeing state legislatures to gerrymander legislative districts to systemically dilute and weaken the voting power of racial minorities. Mr. Obama wrote in response to the decision. And it serves as just one more example of how a majority of the current court seems intent on abandoning its vital role in ensuring equal participation in our democracy and protecting the rights of minority groups against majority overreach. What nonsense! The case before the court concerned Louisiana's 2024 decision, under pressure from the courts, to draw a congressional map that included a second majority black district. Supporters said the racial gerrymander was necessary to comply with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which bars the use of qualifications, standards, or procedures that make it harder for minorities to cast a ballot. Opponents contended that the map violated the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause by sorting voters based on race. In a 6-3 ruling, the justices sided with the challengers and said Louisiana unlawfully discriminated by race when it created a second majority black district. Mr. Obama is pretending that the decision somehow threatens the black franchise, but it didn't touch Section 2 protections against efforts to restrict black voting. All the court did was scale back a judicially created doctrine based on the assumption that most white voters would never support black candidates. The former president of all people should appreciate that this is no longer the case. When Mr. Obama won the presidency in 2008, he secured a larger share of the white vote than the two previous nominees of his party, John Kerry in 2004 and Al Gore in 2000, and he carried a majority of the white vote in nearly a third of the states. When he was reelected in 2012, the black voter turnout rate exceeded white turnout. Today, black voter registration in the South, where black voter suppression was most pronounced in the Jim Crow era, is higher than in other regions of the U.S. The real reason Mr. Obama is upset with last week's ruling has nothing to do with voting rights and everything to do with the ability of Democrats to use the 1965 Act to gain a partisan advantage in drawing political maps. The Voting Rights Act was intended to ensure ballot access, not to ensure the election of black Democrats. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the May 6, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening.